You are listening to Attractive Relationships, the podcast where we dive deep into the art and science of relationships and communication. I'm Rico Armstrong, your host and advocate for attractive, happy relationships. In a world where relationships play a crucial role in our personal and professional lives, understanding how to communicate to connect with others is essential. Transform your communication skills to increase your social status, your social confidence, and help you gain the best relationships you can have. Welcome to Attractive Relationships. All right, if you are a woman and you want a little bit more of an insight to a man when he's really going through it, you can listen to this episode. But other than that, this episode is really to address men who are really going through it. Because every good man wants to be able to uh, provide for himself, to provide for his family, and a good man is going to take a lot of pride in his ability to do so. He might measure his own worth and his ability to do so, because he also knows that other people are measuring his worth in his ability to provide. And yet, if a man is really going through it and he's consistently been burnt out for a long period of time, and maybe he's going through certain things that make it hard for him to find that energy and that drive to continue to be ambitious or to improve himself or to do things in life with that same joy and pride, it can be very difficult for that man to figure out how to overcome whatever he's trying to get through, to be that good man that he wants to be for himself and for his girlfriend and wife, his future girlfriend and wife, or his kids. And so that's what this episode is really going to address, is how can a man be capable to do more when he's really going through it? And part of the reason why this is, I mean, if you've been listening to some of the podcast episodes, and I've been very honest and open about a lot of the things that I've been through, and there's been repeated moments where I definitely was going through it, and I definitely felt less than. I felt shame for not being able to do certain things that I felt like other men were able to do seemingly so much easier than I was. Or I would compare myself to other men my same age and think, why am I not able to accomplish what they've accomplished? Why have I not been able to provide for myself and my family the way that somebody of a similar age has been able to do for them? And and again, it's just because sometimes we as men, we compare our self-worth to what we were able to bring. It kind of reminds me, there was an old Chris Rock stand-up he did, and he had a line that I really resonated with. The crowd laughed a lot, and I kind of laughed too, because sometimes the truth is funny. And this was a truth that for me in my life, I thought it was funny. This is what Chris Rock said. He said, men, he goes, women, children, and dogs are the only ones that are loved unconditionally. Men are loved under the condition that they provide. And again, he said it as a comedian would deliver that line, but it was very funny in context with everything else that he was saying. As a man listening to that, and I was like, I don't know how to say that's not true. Now, again, if you're a woman listening to that statement, maybe you have a different perspective. I'm just letting you know what I thought about it, and what a lot of other guy friends that I talk to feel is that men are not loved unconditionally. It's if a man does not demonstrate his capabilities to provide, um, women tend to leave that man. Not all women, but a lot of women, enough of them. And if they don't leave, sometimes the woman will definitely let their man know that they are underachieving, and let that man know that, hey, I want to let you know I'm sticking this out because I want to be a good woman, but you're underachieving. Like they let them know that in certain ways. And and it's not to shame women who might be doing that. I think if a man's not providing in a sufficient way for the house, and especially if the household is struggling financially, so let's say, it's stressful for everybody, and it becomes very difficult for to have the right to exercise the right tools that are helping you get through it as opposed to hurting you. In this episode of Attractive Relationships, if you are a man that seems to be going through it and are really struggling to figure out how to get past that, so that way you can have that drive with joy, that energy to do more with joy. This is the episode for you. And this is in this episode of Attractive Relationships, this has a lot to do with the relationship that you have with yourself first, and the conversations that you have by yourself to yourself. And then it leads into how you are able to interact with other people around you. But it starts with the conversation um, with yourself first. So I'm going to say this, that as I am in this space of relationships and life coaching, one of the things that I see that's very, very popular specifically for men and their development is this idea that you just have to man up, that you just have to, try harder. Don't be a bitch, don't be a pussy. That's what a lot of the things out there from some top male leading coaches are. And I think that's a mistake personally, because it's just, how do you continue to try harder at the things that led to the place where you're currently at? I don't, I think if you're in it for the short time, like if there's a short period of time where you have that burnout or anxiety, then sure, man up, do what you need to do, put your feelings aside, fuck your feelings, kind of that kind of mentality. Yeah, you're a man, you can do that. However, if that strategy did not work and you are now finding yourself 30 days, 60 days, 3 months later, not getting better or not feeling better, but actually getting worse. And now you're more short with your words, and now you're more frustrated with your spouse, or the fact that you don't have one, or with your boss, and now you're more angry, and the relationships around you are starting to deteriorate. Should the answer really be just man up and do more of the same? I disagree with that. Here's what I would recommend instead. I recommend first that you have a conversation with yourself and assess where you're really at. And this conversation with yourself has to be brutally honest. Brutally honest. And here's why I say this. There is a difference between you being burnt out versus being anxious versus being depressed. There's a difference between all of them. And when you are making an assessment, you have to be able to identify, am I just simply tired and burnt out? Am I anxious, or am I depressed? Because depending on where you are at will depend on the plan of action you can then take. Would you like to know what the difference is as you're making the assessment? I'll tell you. Uh, if you are just burnt out, the solution to that can be fairly simple. You can go play a round of golf, or uh, go on a vacation, like something where you can just kind of leave and come back and feel recharged, is maybe all that it really takes if you're burnt out. Maybe all it takes is a beer with your buddy or somebody that you really trust, just to kind of vent over something. Maybe you're venting over your boss at work. Maybe you're venting over whatever it is. And then all of a sudden you feel better. And then you can go back and continue to be your capable, manly self. Hey, real quick, this is a message for the good men who are listening to this podcast. If you are a good man, there's no doubt that you take a lot of pride in proving your capability to provide for yourself, to provide for your family or to your future family. There's a lot of pride and joy that comes with that. Also, as a good man, you and I both know that when we are able to show the full capabilities of what we can do, it makes us more attractive to our employer. It makes us more attractive to our clients if you have your own business. And it definitely makes you more attractive to your spouse, girlfriend, or significant other. The question I have for you is, how can you really present your most capable and attractive version of yourself if you have been suffering through chronic burnout, anxiety, or depression? Something that's not talked about enough for good men like you and myself. And that's why I'm excited to share with you, for the first time ever, a new workshop course that's coming out in July of 2024, which is coming up very soon. It is the Capable Man's Guide to Overcoming Chronic Burnout, Anxiety, and Depression. So if you have been suffering from chronic burnout or anxiety for 3 months or more, this workshop is for you. You can overcome these things and be able to do that for life, so you can present your best, most attractive self, so you can attract the best relationships, so you can go out and make the most money that you're capable of doing, and be more attractive to your current girlfriend or spouse if that's your situation. If you would like to learn more about this, again, it's going to be a small group. It's going to be about 20 or less. This will be the least expensive it'll ever be, and it's something that's brand new I want to share with you. And if that is something of interest to you, make sure to click the link below in the show notes. Now back to the episode. That's when you know you're burnt out, and that's it. But if you've tried those things and it didn't work, or it only worked for like a couple of days or maybe a week at most, and then you go right back into feeling tired and frustrated a lot. Well, now we have to have an honest conversation about, are you anxious or are you depressed? And this is the part where I think a lot of men really struggle, because most men are not willing to easily admit when they are suffering from anxiety or depression. And the reason why is because we as men know that as soon as we do, we are instantly less attractive to everybody. We are less attractive to our employer. We are less attractive to our girlfriend, spouse, or our future girlfriend, spouse. Like, we can't mention that kind of stuff on a date or even a second or third date, because being authentic and vulnerable in that way, again, makes us less attractive. And so as men, we don't tend to admit those things. Combine that with the fact that we get shamed if we are. If we say, I'm really going through it, I feel anxious, I feel depressed, we might get some sympathy and pity, but we will also get shame and judgment. It's like, well, he's just not man enough to handle the realities of life. And so we will refuse to admit those things. And I can say this from personal experience. I remember when I married my first wife, and again, if you heard there, I'll tell this story just real quickly. I got laid off on my honeymoon, and if you can imagine, as a man in that position, like, I just married my bride. No woman's going to sign up to marry a man with no job, and yet 2 days after my wedding, I'm jobless. And this is in 2007, where it was the Great Recession, and jobs were hard to come by. I was out of work for at least a year, and I remember 3 months into that situation, as I'm just trying to man up and find a way, I kept getting sadder and sadder. And I remember having this conversation with myself that was not honest. I remember saying to myself at the kitchen table, I am not depressed. I said, because people who are depressed will use that as a crutch to not try or to not do. And I refuse to be that way. I'm going to continue to do and try. 3 months after that, Things did not get better, they got worse. And emotionally, I was trying less because sometimes by that point, getting 2 feet off the bed was the big accomplishment on some days. That's a bad situation. And so I had another conversation with myself, and this time I was brutally honest. And here's what I said. This is the conversation that really helped change my life on all of this. It was with the question. The question that I asked myself was, if if I am suffering from depression and I refuse to acknowledge it, how could I ever get better if I refuse to acknowledge this as a possibility? That question changed my life because even though at that time I wasn't really understanding depression to the extent that I do now, just having that honest conversation to say this might be possible and I need to be willing to address it if it is, allowed me to then become better. I didn't get weaker for that. I got stronger. Now, I didn't necessarily need to admit that to everybody else, but I did need to admit that to myself. So, going back to, if you are a man really going through it, assess where you're at. And just real quick, if you want to know if you are burnt out, anxious, or depressed, again, burnt out, as I mentioned earlier, is just you're tired and you can recharge by just taking a break and coming back and you feel great. Problem solved. But if you are anxious, anxiety, the definition of anxiety is overwhelm plus loneliness. And the definition of depression is hopelessness plus loneliness. Do you see the difference? So if you're anxious, you feel like you've got so much on your plate, or you've got too many options or too many things on your to-do list, and you feel like you have to do it alone. And depression is, I have no options to do things that I need to do, and you feel like you're alone and nobody understands you. The only thing that's in common between those two is the feeling of loneliness. But there is a difference. Anxiety is usually the precursor to depression, because when you're anxious and you have all these things and you're just going to man up and do them, and you feel like you have to do it by yourself, and then you continue to do that and yet still feel overwhelmed, eventually you're like hopeless, like, I can never do this. And you might want to give up. Assess where you're at. That is the first thing. And the second thing, once you assess, is to acknowledge where you're at. If you can do those things, you can then start to make a plan of action. And that is when it becomes a bit more exciting. Now, to do that, it's a little bit more in depth than I can get into in this podcast episode. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see these two books behind me. They're both by Simon Sinek. One is Start With Why, and the other one is Find Your Why. And what I do find is that for most men, if they feel overwhelmed or hopeless, most men have gotten off track on doing the actions that mean the most for him. And we just need to simply get on track. Here's the caveat. Most men have not figured out the things that matter most to them. They've convinced themselves otherwise. Oh, what matters most to me is my family or my kids. And those are um, very good things to esteem, like to want to work for. How I would also say that if we are trying to model ourselves as good, capable men that we want for our children and we want for our significant other, there is something more. And these books help us, by Simon Sinek, to Start With Why and Find Your Why, help with that. Highly recommend reading those books. If you don't want to read, as of the time of this episode, I am actually going to do something brand new where I will be coaching men on exactly how to overcome chronic burnout depression, anxiety, so you can be the capable version of yourself that you know you can and want to be. That way you can be the most attractive version of yourself. And you can have these skills so you can always overcome these things for life. Because the reality is, things are going to happen in life that will knock you down, that will make you burn out, that could lead to anxiety or depression. And the answer is not always man up, bitch. Sometimes it's just reassessing where we're at and then creating that environment that allows us to be our best self instead of continuing to swim in the environment or continuing to do the actions that take away and zap the energy and drive that leads us to our best self. And so, if you are interested in doing such, and you are a man, this is a course training for men. This is something I've never done before. It's going to be live. It's going to be the lowest price it has ever been done for. And if you are interested in learning more about that, you can click the link in the show notes. And if you have other questions, you can always DM me. Again, Coach Rico Strong, or at Attractive Relationships. You can find it on the social medias there. All right, that's it for now, y'all. I hope you guys have a great one, and I will chat with you next time. As we come to the end of another episode of Attractive Relationships, I want to express my gratitude to you for tuning in. Your support really does mean the world to me. Now, if this episode brought you any value, I would truly appreciate it if you shared this podcast with anyone that you think could benefit from our discussions on effective communication and relationship building. Until next time, remember, great relationships start with great communication. So stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep building those attractive relationships.